Hi, for those that don't know me, my name is Andrew Whalan. I've run in the past as an independent candidate from New South Wales for the Federal Senate, and I've run twice. I didn't run in the most recent election, but I do hope to run again in the future. There's about 3 people that like my commentary on this sort of stuff, so I figured I'd record a short podcast about the recent election, and that way you don't have to read my rant. I guess the election really came down to being a tight one. That was the thing that really kept everyone talking and really sort of delayed us knowing who our new government was going to be. I think it was tight because no one really trusts the leaders and their parties at the moment. People have lost their faith in the major parties and, more importantly, their leaders. Polls before the election had up to 1 in 4 voters wanting anyone but Labor or the Coalition. So let's just take a look at the leaders of the Coalition, Labor and the Greens in their order of public trust, and I'll base that on ABC Vote Compass. So the number 1 trusted leader, surprisingly enough, was Turnbull. Personally, I think he lacks credibility for 3 main reasons. First of all, broken promises. Second, I think he has poor and reactive leadership of his party. And there's just some transparent lies that I just think really show he's not worthy to be the leader or our Prime Minister. Many of the promises he made before he took over the Libs were broken. I think it was about 2008. He said he would never lead a party that didn't have a meaningful climate change policy in place, or words to that effect. Well, he gladly knifed Abbott in the back to lead the party without that in place. Obviously, the NBN is a big issue for me, being in technology, but when they changed their technology mix to the inferior copper solution, they said that everyone would have 25 to 100 megabits by now. That's just not in place. And a lot of people are having a horrible outcome from fibre to the node in my area. I think the NBN is something that's worth talking about maybe in more detail in another podcast. Other key promises that they broke were cuts to SBS and ABC, which provide programming that has more Aussie or international content that the commercial stations just aren't willing to provide because they see it as too niche and just not going to get the numbers for the advertising that they want. I guess the other interesting thing to note is that the ABC's really got the best election coverage, and if you look at the Chase's commentary on the election, there's nothing really that comes close to it on the commercial stations. If you haven't seen it already, you can check it out on iView, and it'll be available, I think, until early next month. We then actually have to look at the actual harm that they did to the health system with closing down Medicare local branches, and they failed to restore the private healthcare rebate. I'm a big supporter of a broader base for Medicare and keeping it free for all, but I do believe that private health insurance can have its place, especially when we need to wait for a government to come into power that would genuinely improve the hospital system and reduce waiting lists. Turnbull and his party allowed Labor to set up much of the agenda during the election campaign, particularly around things like Medicare. They put changes on the table around co-payment, and Labor scored some quick points around that. The other thing that I think shows poor leadership is that Turnbull was unable to bring the crossbenchers around, and he took the cowards option and called a double dissolution just to wipe them out of the Senate so he wouldn't have to deal with them. Given Turnbull's history with Aussie Mail, one of the first ISPs in Australia, Turnbull has to be lying through his teeth when it comes to the long-term sustainability and suitability for fibre to the node, along with a financial rationale which just simply isn't there. He made $56.5 million in 5 years with his early investment in Aussie Mail. So he would know how that company's running and why it was so successful. So he's got to understand some of these fundamental issues when it comes to telecommunications. He got in with Aussie Mail before they listed on the ASX, and then he got out after they acquired about 850 smaller ISPs, and then were bought out by WorldCom in 1999. If we move on to the Greens, they're the second most trusted leader with Di Natalia. Given their association with the hard left, it's not surprising to see that many people, especially the Conservatives, would really find Di Natalia hard to trust. As I've taken more time to read the policies of the Greens and see what they actually say, I've been pleasantly surprised with some of their policies, focusing on what's good for people rather than the big corporations like the Coalition so often does. I think for the Greens and the Di Natalia in particular, to get more trust from the population, they're going to have to separate themselves from the lunatic fringe. But that's going to be really hard for them to do without disenfranchising their sort of core supporter base. One thing I really love from the Greens is they recently have been pushing for a federal ICAC to stop some of the corruption that we're seeing, particularly around the rorts, with helicopters being expensed out to travel to political fundraising events and things like that, which nobody's happy to see. I doubt you'll see either major of parties wanting to have a federal ICAC, because they've all got way too many skeletons in their closet. So it's just not in their interest, so they're not going to do it. So third on the list is Shorten. I'm not that surprised that he's not trusted, because particularly there's been a lot of stuff in the news with the unions around just dodgy dealings. So one of the ones that you may have heard about is that one of the workers' unions and the major employers were colluding to try and push down wages and entitlements. So that was companies like Macca's, Woolies and Coles, and they were colluding with the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association. It was really disgusting to see that they could work so hard against people that at the low end of society with their jobs, like they're earning award wages that are quite often low, and in this case some of them were below minimum wage. I hope that people really serve some jail time for it. Whether that's going to happen or not, we'll just have to wait and see. Another thing that Shorten needs to do to gain trust is, like Turnbull, show some solid leadership. Rather than being the yappy attack dog, going against everything the government says and does, he needs to pick his fights better on the issues that are going to draw in the lower and middle class voters. Because let's face it, rich people are unlikely to ever want to see anything but a coalition government. By comparison, you've got someone like Jason Clare, the Shadow Minister for Communications, and he has his message clear and resounding around the NBN. Because of that, he's getting a lot of airtime and smashing his opponent, who's Mitch Fifield. I had to Google for the relevant minister, which shows how out of the debate he is on this issue. By comparison, Jason Clare has his message clear and resounding around the NBN. Because of that, he's getting a lot of airtime and smashing his opponent. The NBN is a vote winner for some of the people I've spoken to because of the negative impact to their life and to their business that substandard internet access brings. We're 60th in the world. It's not good enough for Mr. Jobs and Growth Turnbull. Admittedly, Shorten doesn't have the luxury of just worrying about one platform like Jason Clare, but he needs to focus on key issues rather than his shotgun approach of 100 positive policies. Overall, the leaders need to target trust, and I think the way to do that is to stop with all the petty games that they've been playing with, the point scoring and the one-upping. People are sick of it. I think the leader who stands up for it and encourages their party not to act like children in question time will see a huge surge in voter support. While they don't tend to have many seats, I don't tend to see the Greens acting like children in the Senate or the House of Reps. Maybe that's something the other party should emulate if they're so worried about the Greens that they'll work together to trade preferences. One thing I was really happy to see is Ricky Muir got a bit more support this election. He got 25,000 this election on first preference and 17 last. So for him, that's a good improvement. Obviously, he didn't benefit from preferences this time round and didn't get a seat. From what I saw of him when he was in the Senate, he was one of the best politicians we've had in a long time because he is honest and committed to doing the best possible job, not just to play stupid games and win points. I really hope Ricky gets in again one day, and while I'm not a big fan of single-issue parties, I do think we need more normal, regular Aussies in Parliament rather than career politicians who are so obviously detached from the world. Thanks for listening. I'll do this again if people are interested in hearing me talk more about politics in Australia or any number of other topics that I could go on about. Thanks for listening. I'll do this again if people are interested in hearing me talk more on politics in Australia or any other topic that I could go on about, like the NBN or technology or any number of things. Feel free to hit me up with any questions or comments you might have. I love free speech, so feel free to call me out if you think I'm wrong. Thanks. Bye.